God.
Praise God.
I want to give thanks to Bishop Hawkins for the opportunity to be here today, and for Elder Jenkins and Ms. Barbara Jones for shepherding me through this process, and particularly to Tanika Kyle for extending the invitation. So what I wanted to talk about here today is really focused on the organization. So as a foundation of that discussion, let's talk first about what is an organization. What is an organization? Anybody? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Let's get that on the microphone one more time. Say that again, nice and loud so everyone can hear you.
A group of like-minded individuals working towards a common goal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's a group of people working together to accomplish a common goal. Now, when I think about an organization, there's really three sides to an organization. Think about a triangle. On one side is what we do, the why.
Yes.
Right? The chaplain talked about the purpose. It's what we do, why we do it.
Yes.
The other side of the triangle is the have. In this case, it's our members, it's our buildings, it's the things that we set our goals about. How do we take care of the blessings that God has given us? What I want to focus on now is the bottom of that triangle. It's the am, the what we are as an organization. The same thing for us as individuals. We are not just what we do, our title, our occupation, or what we have, our material possessions, the people in our lives. It's who we are.
Yes.
Culture and values is fundamentally about the character of the organization. So we're going to explore this concept of character. Now, I give God thanks because what He has done for me over 30 years has given me the opportunity to learn in places and spaces, not just about how organizations operate, but about the character of organizations. And I've seen this over and over and over again, working in hundreds of organizations as a global consultant, is that what makes or breaks the success of the organization is not what they do or what they have. It's about who they are.
Wow, that's good.
Okay, so let's talk about organization is like a tree, a complex system of interconnected parts, interdependent parts. And so when I think about the culture of the organization, the branches, the leaves, the things that we see, it's the manifestation of what's underneath. When I think about the trunk, that's leadership.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we heard from the chaplain about leadership, the strength of leadership. But think about the trunk of a tree, and we'll talk about some examples. That tree, if it's healthy, if it's solid, is constant all the way through.
That's good.
You can see the rings of the life of that tree. When you cut it open, you can see if it's intact. If it is not, if it is hollow, you do not have the strength of the culture.
That's good.
And underneath the surface are the values. Those are the roots. So we're going to talk about your branches, your leaves, your trunk, and your roots. But we can't talk about those things without context, and that's the soil. The soil of the organization is the legacy. It's the history.
That's good.
It's the environment. Because if it is toxic, it will poison the entire thing. Now, we can look at the national conversation, and I won't go there because we could be out here all day long. If we want to understand the values of our country right now, let's look at what's happening on the branches. From the root to the fruit.
Next slide.
Let's go one more. You with me?
That's good.
All right, so culture, talk about the fruit, what's on the branches. How many of you have a magnolia tree anywhere near your house? What happens when it blossoms? It's beautiful, isn't it? It's pleasant. And in an organization, You have some organizational environments where it's pleasant, where it's blossoming, where you just walk in and you just feel it. You sense it. It's good. Next slide. And if it's healthy, it can bear fruit. Fruit that nourishes your body, your mind, and your spirit. When you're in an organizational environment where the culture is healthy, you're filled through that. You're not just expending your energy, but you're renewed in that environment. Next slide. But as I said, we talk about the trunk, the leadership, the substance, the character of leaders, as we heard earlier this morning. When it's strong, it's healthy. If it's hollow, it's weak. And weak leadership at the trunk of this organizational tree will make the entire thing weak. If it's barren, it's lonely. How many of you have ever been in a cultural environment in a workplace where there's no leaves on the tree? You got like Charlie Brown Christmas tree. We've been there. So when we think about the culture, the branches and the leaves of an organization, it's about what we see. Let's go. Keep going on this slide here. Thank you. What people do, what you see, what you hear, and how we feel. Now what happens is it's this interplay, because I call it the cause and the effect of culture. Because the culture that we create has both an effect on these experiences, but also what we do, see, feel, and hear affects the culture. So it's reciprocal. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so look at this picture. So when you see in this environment, what does this tell you about this organization's culture? Is what? It's closed, divided. Are people working together or are they working independent? Separately, right? Now, do you think this organization focused primarily on numbers or experience? Numbers. Okay, let's go to the next one. What about this one? Collaborative, interactive, co-creating, teamwork, open communication. Now, you think something as minor as the layout of an organizational environment would have such a reflection of the culture. It not only creates the culture, but it's actually an indication of the culture and the values underneath. So we can talk about what's at the root. Okay? So, now we think about an organization as a tree. You got the branches and the leaves are your culture. You got the trunk, which is your leadership. It's a conduit between the roots, the values, and the culture, the manifestation of those values through behaviors and practices. Okay? And because we spent time on the leadership, the trunk, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, although I would just underscore everything that we heard earlier from the chaplain, which was absolutely right on, is that the character of the leader makes all the difference in the strength of the organization and the demonstration of the values through the culture. So the soil, the legacy, the environment, and the history permeates everything. So in some cases where that is not healthy, you gotta like dig the whole thing up and plant a new sapling. What they call the best thing sometimes that you can do to a forest is burn it down. Because sometimes you just got to start over. So we can talk about the values for a minute. So what are our values? So this is a build slide, so we're going to start. Priorities. Okay? Where you put your time, where you put your money. You can tell the values of an organization by where we invest. See, the thing about values is that an organization will have their values, they'll be articulated, they'll have them posted up, and they'll hang them up, but guess what? What actually gets done, what actually gets practiced, is incongruent with the expressed values of the organization. So follow the money, follow the time. It'll tell you about the values. It's also about the assumptions that we make about ourselves. You know, how do we see ourselves in the world as an organization? Do we see ourselves as the center? Do we see ourselves as servants?
That's good. That's good.
The next is about the standards. Not the standard of living, but the standards for living. What are the standards? What do we tolerate? What do we accept? And we can look in the news and we can see lots of organizations where there's a lot of tolerations of things because we accept those as part of the standards where organizations have failed. The next is beliefs. What do we really believe? Believe about ourselves, believe about our members, believe about the community, believe about the unchurched.
Yes. Yeah.
What is our beliefs about the unchurched? I mean, these are questions to really dig into.
Yes.
You know? Do we believe that they're just choosing to avoid God? Or do we believe that they maybe have had some experiences that have made them reluctant to come back into a community environment like this? So when we have an organization where we focus on the do and the have, remember we talked about the triangle, do, have, am. What we do, it might look like we're doing all the right things. What we have, it might look like we got it all together. Got all these buildings, all these people. But what we are as the foundation, the bottom of that triangle, if it's weak, the whole thing implodes.
That's good.
So we talked a little bit about how values show up as behaviors. And so our values around leadership, faith, love, compassion, comfort, and encouragement, just challenge you to think about what does that look like in practical application. Not in concept, not in philosophy. In practice. Consistently.
Yeah.
You can tell the culture of an organization by what we do when we are in the most difficult times. This is why this example of the hurricane tells you a lot, is that when we get in crisis mode, that happens to us as individuals too. Your character, that's what comes out, because you go right to what's natural. The same thing in an organization. When it gets tough, how do we behave? How do we treat each other? So what values, as you look at these values that have been discussed today, are there other values that we need to create the ideal culture here? You know, can we revisit them and say, is there anything missing? If there's not, then is there a difference between our stated values and what we practice on a daily basis? The third question to ask yourself is, if there's a difference between what we say we are and what we show we are, what's that disconnect all about? And how do we bridge it?
That's good. That's good.
So, in close, as we think about the culture is a manifestation of our values. So what kind of tree do you want to be?